They were everywhere. Blockbuster movies, Oscar wins, contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. And then, silence. No scandal. No press statement explaining it all. They just vanished, for years, sometimes for decades. But here's the interesting part. Almost every one of these stories has an unexpected twist. Today, we're looking at 7 celebrities who walked away from fame at its absolute peak, the real reasons why, and what actually happened to them next. Welcome back to the channel. Not every disappearance is a mystery or a tragedy. Sometimes people just choose a different life, family, peace of mind, creative freedom. Today, 7 stars, 7 completely different reasons for stepping back, and how it all actually turned out. Subscribe if you like these deep dives. I promise, by the end of this video you'll notice a clear pattern connecting every single one of these stories. Let's start with what might be the most touching example on this list. Number 1. Rick Moranis. By the late 1980s, Rick Moranis was one of the most recognizable comedic actors on the planet. Ghostbusters, Spaceballs, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, The Flintstones. In a single decade, he'd appeared in several of the biggest box office hits of the era. He wasn't a supporting player. He was a draw in his own right. Then, after 1997, he just stopped. No farewell interview. No dramatic exit. For decades, fans built their own theories, a studio falling out, creative burnout. Some assumed he'd simply retired. The truth turned out to be far more personal and far sadder. In 1991, Moranis' wife, costume designer and Belsky, died of breast cancer. Moranis was left a single father of 2 young children. He hasn't hidden this in his rare later interviews. He didn't want his kids raised by nannies while he disappeared for months onto film sets in other cities. In his own words, he took a break, and that break simply turned into years. Interestingly, Moranis never called it a retirement. He said he simply became very picky about offers, and that he was happy both with the roles he said yes to and the ones he turned down. Hollywood was reluctant to let him go. Studios kept offering him roles for years, including sequels to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, all turned down. In a 2015 interview, when asked why Disney hadn't rebooted the franchise without him yet, Moranis joked that he was surprised too. In February 2020, Moranis himself announced on social media that he was coming back, specifically to reprise the role of Wayne Szalinski in a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids reboot alongside Josh Gad, who was set to produce and co-star. His tweet, captioned "Honey, I'm back," went viral instantly. The project got delayed multiple times, first by the pandemic, then by scheduling conflicts, then by budget issues. But the announcement itself was already a sensation. A man who'd avoided cameras for 20 years had agreed to return to the exact role that made him famous. Moranis still lives quietly today, occasionally popping up for voice work, including Disney's early 2000s Brother Bear films, or brief cameos. In 2025, he gave a rare interview for a Disney Plus documentary series, going through props from the original film's set and admitting he still has very warm memories of making it. But the main thing is, he got exactly the life he wanted. He raised his kids himself, and by his own account, he's never once regretted that choice. If you think choosing family over fame took guts, wait until you hear about the 3-time Oscar winner who walked away from acting entirely, and even put out an official statement about it. Number 2. Daniel Day-Lewis. 3 Academy Awards for Best Actor. A reputation as maybe the most meticulous, fully immersed actor of his generation. Someone who lived inside a character for months before a single scene was even filmed. By 2017, Daniel Day-Lewis was considered practically untouchable in the industry. In the summer of 2017, before Phantom Thread had even been released, Day-Lewis's representatives put out a brief official statement. He would no longer be working as an actor. No explanation, no further comment. Just a full stop on the career of one of cinema's biggest living legends. It was only months later, in an interview with W Magazine, that Day-Lewis opened the door to the truth a little. According to him, playing Couturier Reynolds Woodcock was so exhausting that after filming Wrapped, he and director Paul Thomas Anderson found themselves overwhelmed by a sadness neither of them expected. They hadn't realized what they'd created. Day-Lewis had taken long breaks between films before. He'd even spent a few years in Italy training as a cobbler at one point. But this time, he said, the desire to come back simply didn't return. The news shocked Hollywood. Day-Lewis received an Oscar nomination for that very role, the last of his career. For years, fans and journalists doubted whether it was really permanent, since the actor had publicly quit before and come back. Day-Lewis himself later explained that he didn't want to get pulled back into another project, which is exactly why he chose to go public, to make the decision harder to reverse. And they were right to doubt it. In 2025, after 8 years of silence, Day-Lewis returned in the film Anemone, which he co-wrote with his son, Ronan Day-Lewis. According to the actor, the push came specifically from wanting to work alongside his son, who had become a filmmaker himself. It's a rare case of a legendary final disappearance turning out to be not quite so final. In an interview with Rolling Stone ahead of Anemone's release, Day-Lewis clarified the original reason for his 2017 retirement even further. He said the work itself was something he'd always loved, but something about the process kept leaving him feeling hollowed out, and it was only after Phantom Thread that he first felt that feeling might not fade this time. Today, Day-Lewis lives a far more private life than at the height of his fame, but he no longer rules out new projects, as long as they're as personal and meaningful as working with his own son. But not every disappearance is a big public statement. Sometimes it's just a young actor quietly deciding that fame isn't for him, even while starring in one of the biggest TV shows in the world. Number 3. Jack Gleeson. As King Joffrey on Game of Thrones, Jack Gleeson played one of the most hated villains in television history, which, ironically, made him one of the most talked about young actors on the planet. But Gleeson had actually started acting at age 8, long before Game of Thrones. For him, it had always been more of a hobby than a dream of Hollywood. Back in 2012, while the show was at its peak, Gleeson publicly said he planned to step back from professional acting once his storyline wrapped. In 2014, after his character's death, he genuinely did disappear from screens almost entirely for 6 full years. For years, rumors circulated that the reason was a wave of fan hatred toward his character, that the actor couldn't handle being confused with the role. In 2025, Gleeson finally addressed this directly and shot it down. He said that, thankfully, he never experienced any real hate or aggression from fans. The real reason was simpler. Together with friends at Trinity College Dublin, he'd co-founded a theater company called Collapsing Horse, and he simply found it more exciting to experiment in small independent theater than to keep appearing on the big screen. While the world was busy wondering where the actor behind one of TV's greatest villains had disappeared to, Gleeson was staging puppet shows in Dublin, London, and New York, studying philosophy and theology at Trinity, and even earning a scholarship. During this time, he also appeared in a handful of small stage productions and one short film, and even showed up at a Dublin wrestling event just for fun. that was essentially his entire public footprint for several years. In 2020, he quietly returned to screens in a small British sitcom, and in 2025, he had a genuine comeback, appearing in several major projects at once. Netflix's The Sandman and the historical drama House of Guinness. According to him, he simply started missing screen acting and gradually drifted back into it. No drama, no big announcement. Today, Gleeson comfortably splits his time between both worlds, theater and film, choosing projects that genuinely interest him rather than ones that would bring the most attention. But stepping away from fame isn't always a quiet, gradual process. Sometimes it's a sudden flight across an ocean, walking away from a $50 million deal. Number 4. Dave Chappelle. By 2004, Chappelle's show had become a cultural phenomenon and Comedy Central's highest-rated program ever. This wasn't just success. It was a genuine event. The Season 1 DVD broke sales records, and Chappelle had just signed a reported $50 million deal to continue the show. In May 2005, in the middle of shooting Season 3, Chappelle suddenly disappeared, without even warning his own wife. Within days, it emerged he'd flown to South Africa. The media instantly filled the silence with rumors of drug use and a mental breakdown. In his own interview with Time magazine that same month, Chappelle shot down those rumors, explaining he simply wanted to be alone, away from the pressure of fame. Later, on the Oprah Winfrey Show, he named the real reasons: burnout, a loss of creative control over the show, and an uncomfortable working environment. One specific moment on set stuck with him. Someone on the crew laughed at a sketch in a way he hadn't intended, and it made him question whether people were understanding his comedy the way he meant it. In his words, he'd become more famous than he was comfortable being. Losing Chappelle was one of the biggest cultural shocks of the decade in comedy. Comedy Central was suddenly left without its most successful show, mid-production. The Season 2 DVD had sold over 500,000 copies on its very first day alone. Fans spent years struggling to believe anyone would really walk away from $50 million for the sake of peace of mind. Chappelle later admitted in an interview with David Letterman that at the time, he was convinced this decision would permanently destroy his career. Chappelle never returned to that show. But by 2006, he'd released the documentary Dave Chappelle's Block Party, and starting in 2013, he made a full-force return to stand-up, eventually becoming one of the most successful and talked-about comedians of his generation. So the disappearance didn't end his career. It just gave it a pause before a completely new chapter. Today, Chappelle lives on a large farm in the small town of Yellow Springs, Ohio, with his family. He's told locals there that living well around there doesn't take millions, just a nice smile and good neighbors. By his own account, that's where he finally felt at home, far from the Hollywood machine that had nearly swallowed him whole. Our next story is about an actress who stepped away not just from one project, but from an entire era of her career, seemingly right at its peak. Number 5. Cameron Diaz. Diaz landed in movies almost by accident. At 21, with zero acting experience, she got the female lead opposite Jim Carrey in The Mask, and within a few years became one of the biggest box office draws in the world, starring in There's Something About Mary, Charlie's Angels, and voicing Princess Fiona in Shrek. By 2014, she was still actively working on multiple projects at once. There was no sign of a career slowdown. But 2014, following the film Annie, turned out to be her last role before a long pause. For the next 10 years, Diaz all but disappeared from screens, only occasionally surfacing in projects outside of film. In 2024, Speaking at the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit, Diaz finally explained the reason clearly. It was a decision to reclaim her own life, and no outside opinion or offer could have changed her mind. She married musician Benji Madden in 2015, and by her own account, building her own family became the priority, not another role in another film. It wasn't a passive break. Diaz wrote 2 books on health and longevity, co-founded her own organic wine brand, Avaline, with a business partner, and had 2 children. In other words, her disappearance turned out to be an incredibly full period, just one without Hollywood's cameras. 10 years later, in 2025, Jamie Foxx, Diaz's co-star from Annie, convinced her to return to film for the Netflix project Back in Action. According to Diaz, the turning point came when her husband told her it was finally time to support her dreams, not just his own business ventures. And in 2026, Diaz is also returning to voice Princess Fiona in Shrek 5, the role millions of viewers associate her with. Today, Diaz balances an acting career with business and motherhood, and by her own account, she came back to Hollywood as a completely different person, precisely because she once allowed herself to fully step away from it. Our next story is about a child star who left film as a teenager and did it almost silently. Number 6. Mara Wilson. In the mid-1990s, Mara Wilson was one of the most famous child actresses in the world. The lead role opposite Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire, roles in Miracle on 34th Street, and of course the title role in the cult classic Matilda, based on the Roald Dahl novel. By age 10, she'd already starred in several of the decade's biggest family films. But after 2000's Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Wilson essentially disappeared from the big screen. For a child star of that scale, it looked strange. No new roles, no interviews about her career. In later interviews, Wilson explained it plainly. Film acting simply stopped being fun for her. In her words, doing the same thing over and over until a director considered it right left very little room for creative freedom. On top of that, being a teenager in Hollywood was a genuinely hard period for her. She's talked about constantly comparing herself to other young actresses and feeling insecure under the nonstop attention to her appearance. Her mother also died when she was young, and by her own account, that loss changed how she thought about her own priorities. Instead of continuing a film career, Wilson and her father decided to bet on education. She finished public school and went on to graduate from New York University. As a teenager, she discovered a passion for writing, and that passion ended up shaping the rest of her life. Unlike many former child stars whose names kept resurfacing in the news over personal struggles, Wilson's story passed almost unnoticed by the wider public, precisely because she deliberately chose privacy over continuing a public career. One telling moment happened when she was just 13. She asked for the day off on her birthday instead of doing another round of interviews, and one reporter publicly called her a spoiled brat for it. Wilson later described how painful that was at such a young age. Today, Mara Wilson is a writer, playwright, and author of the memoir Where Am I Now? And she stays active in voice acting. She's voiced characters in BoJack Horseman and Big Hero 6. The series has a recurring role on the audio drama podcast Welcome to Night Vale and has narrated more than 24 audiobooks. She's also outspoken about mental health and has publicly defended other former child stars from excessive media scrutiny over their looks. She said she feels no nostalgia for the films of her childhood, only relief that she found a path that actually makes her happy. Our final story today is about an actress who had it all in the early 90s and deliberately chose a completely different life. long before that became a trend among celebrities. Number 7. Phoebe Cates. Cates started as a child model at age 10, appearing in 17 magazine, and made her film debut at 17. By the 1980s, she'd become one of the most recognizable young actresses in Hollywood, a lead role in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, an iconic part in Gremlins, and status as one of the decade's biggest sex symbols. By the mid-1990s, she'd appeared in over a dozen films in roughly as many years. But after 1994's Princess Caraboo, Cates all but disappeared from the big screen. Over the next nearly 3 decades, she appeared in film only twice, both times in small independent projects made by close friends. The reason turned out to be simple. In 1989, Cates married actor Kevin Kline, and the birth of their 2 children, son Owen in 1991 and daughter Greta in 1994, became the turning point. According to Kline, the couple had originally planned to alternate projects so one parent would always be home with the kids. But in practice, whenever it was her turn to work, Cates kept choosing to stay home instead. The family deliberately moved away from the Hollywood scene, settling on Manhattan's Upper East Side, where Cates and Kline raised their children as privately as possible. In 2005, Cates opened her own boutique, Blue Tree, on Madison Avenue in New York, which is still open today. She's described the move as chasing a dream that had nothing to do with Hollywood at all. Unlike many actors who disappear only to try clawing their way back, Cates never once showed interest in fully reviving her career over those 30 years. Her only 2 on-screen appearances during that time, a 2001 film directed by a close friend, and voicing her Gremlins character for a 2015 video game, happened purely out of personal friendship, not any desire to return to the industry. Today, Cates and Kline have been married for more than 35 years, a rarity in Hollywood, where, as Kline himself once joked, any marriage lasting more than 6 months already deserves a spot in the record books. Cates still runs her Blue Tree boutique, which she describes as something like an old-fashioned general store, just according to her own taste, selling clothing, jewelry, and home goods. Both of their now adult children, Owen and Greta, went on to pursue creative careers, and Cates herself is living the life she deliberately chose for herself 30 years ago. Almost all 7 of them disappeared without a single scandal, and most of them, eventually, came back, some for brief cameos, some for full-blown careers, and some found an entirely new calling. Turns out, disappearing is rarely permanent. More often, it's just a pause someone genuinely needed. Which of these 7 stories hit you the hardest? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, check out this video next. See you in the next one.